They call it the empire that never was, and yet its traces seem to whisper from the stones of forgotten cities and the yellowed pages of ancient maps. The Tartarian Empire, a name once sprawled across old atlases in bold letters, covering vast lands from the frozen tundra of Siberia to the borders of China and beyond. For centuries, it was there, printed for all to see, a realm so immense it dwarfed Europe itself. But then, as if by command, it vanished. Its name erased, its people forgotten, its stories silenced. What kind of empire disappears not through conquest or collapse, but through deletion? What if the ruins we walk past today, the grand facades and towering domes we call imperial or neoclassical, were not products of the 18th or 19th centuries, but remnants of something older, something erased from our collective memory? In quiet corners of the internet, a theory grew, one that questions everything we've been taught about the past. It began with old photographs, massive stone buildings, intricate arches, and perfect symmetry standing in cities that were supposedly built by pioneers with horses and hand tools. People asked, how could such precision exist in an age of candles and carriages? Then came the maps. 17th-century globes labeling northern Asia as Great Tartary. The questions multiplied. Who were these Tartarians? Why do official histories say so little about them? Why were their cities buried under layers of mud, their architecture repurposed, their names scrubbed from textbooks? For many, the mystery of Tartaria became the symbol of a larger question. What if entire chapters of human civilization have been hidden in plain sight? Yet beneath this intrigue lies a deeper fascination, not merely with lost empires, but with the very nature of history itself. Why do we believe some narratives and dismiss others? Why do ancient monuments across continents look eerily alike, as if born from a shared design language the modern world no longer understands? Could there truly have been a global civilization more advanced, more unified than we dare to imagine? Or are we seeing patterns born from our own longing for forgotten greatness? The mystery of Tartaria is not just about maps or ruins. It's about truth, power, and memory. It is about the stories we choose to keep, and the ones we allow to be erased. To uncover the tale of the Tartarian Empire is to step into the twilight between fact and myth, between the documented and the denied. This journey will lead us through ancient cartography and modern conspiracy, through the architecture of empires and the architecture of belief. We will trace the outlines of Tartary across the old world, from the frozen plains of Siberia to the grand boulevards of St. Petersburg, from the spires of Paris to the exhibition palaces of Chicago, searching not for the ghosts of an empire, but for the truth buried beneath centuries of interpretation and illusion. Perhaps, by the end, we may not find a lost civilization, but something even more profound, a revelation about ourselves and the human hunger to find meaning in the ruins of time. For centuries, the maps of the world carried a name so vast it seemed to stretch across the very skin of the earth itself. Tartaria. It sprawled from the frozen edges of Siberia to the mountains of Tibet, from the plains of Mongolia to the Pacific coast, from the borders of Europe to the shores of China. To the cartographers of the West, this was not merely a region, it was an enigma, a single word to describe everything they did not yet understand. A continent of shadows drawn in confident ink. In the great map rooms of Amsterdam, Paris, and London, men hunched over globes by candlelight, tracing with quills the outlines of lands they had never seen. And across that immense blank space, they wrote one word, bold and certain, Tartary. In truth, there never was a single Tartarian empire. No centralized throne, no imperial capital, no unified people bearing that name. The word was born from misunderstanding and distance. It emerged in the Middle Ages, when travelers like Marco Polo returned from the East with stories of the Mongol Khans, vast armies of horsemen sweeping across the steppe, their tents like cities of silk. To Europeans, the Mongol world seemed endless, unknowable, a sea of nomads without borders. So they gave it a single name, a convenient container for everything beyond their reach. Tartary became the label for mystery itself. As the centuries unfolded, the name evolved but endured. Renaissance mapmakers copied it faithfully from their predecessors, spreading it across Asia like a great phantom empire. Jesuit missionaries in the 17th century ventured deep into the steppes and Siberia, sending back letters filled with wonder and confusion. They wrote of tribes who spoke strange tongues, of frozen forests where the sun barely rose, of lakes that stretched to the horizon. But even as knowledge grew, the word Tartaria remained, printed on maps with the authority of truth. By the 18th century, it had come to signify a vast geography: independent Tartary in Central Asia, Chinese Tartary beyond the Great Wall, Siberian Tartary in the frozen north. What began as a placeholder for ignorance became, paradoxically, a monument to imagination. On these maps, entire kingdoms were drawn from rumor, rivers invented, mountains misplaced, cities created from second-hand tales. To hold one of these maps was to glimpse a world suspended between myth and geography, a reminder of how easily mystery becomes mistaken for empire. When European explorers finally reached these regions in the 18th and 19th centuries, they found not a single civilization, but a mosaic of peoples: Kazakhs, Uzbeks, Mongols, Yakuts, Buryats, each with their own languages, faiths, and histories. The so-called Tartarian Empire dissolved under the light of direct observation. And yet, when the name Tartary vanished from maps in the late 19th century, it left behind a haunting absence. For hundreds of years, it had represented an entire half of the world. Its disappearance was sudden, complete, as if erased overnight. The new maps bore the marks of science and empire: the Russian provinces, the Qing frontiers, the emerging Central Asian Khanates. The age of precision replaced the age of wonder. But for those who later stumbled upon the old maps, for those who saw the vast word Tartaria stretched across the world, the erasure itself became suspicious. How could a name once so dominant vanish without a trace? Thus, in the digital age, curiosity returned to that empty space. What ancient civilization, they asked, had been hidden beneath the term? What culture had been erased when Tartaria was replaced by borders and nations? The answer, perhaps, lies not in the disappearance of a people, but in the transformation of perspective. Tartaria was never destroyed. It was redefined. What the West once called mystery, we now call geography. But the echo of that lost name still resonates, calling to those who look at the old maps and wonder, what else might have been forgotten beneath the shifting lines of history? The legend of Tartaria did not truly awaken from its slumber on ancient maps. It re-emerged from the stone and steel of our own cities. In the forgotten corners of the modern world, amid weathered facades and grand civic halls, people began to see something extraordinary. Buildings that seemed impossibly old, impossibly perfect, impossibly advanced for their time. Cathedrals with domes that soared like planets suspended in air, columns carved with mathematical precision, and facades ornamented with impossible geometry. Structures said to have been built in decades, that still echo with horse-drawn carriages and gas lamps. To some, these could not have been the work of 19th-century hands. They looked older, grander, and more unified than the fragmented styles of modern architecture could explain. When digital archivists began to unearth early photographs from the dawn of photography, the 1850s, the 1860s, they found entire cities already complete, already magnificent. St. Petersburg, with its endless boulevards and marble palaces, seemed to appear in history almost fully formed. Chicago's monumental buildings of the 1893 World's Fair, raised in a matter of months and demolished soon after, were cited as evidence of rediscovery rather than creation. Across the world, from Paris to Tashkent, from Istanbul to San Francisco, the same patterns emerged: immense domes, sweeping arches, and endless symmetry. The believers of Tartaria saw in these not the handiwork of the industrial age, but the remnants of a unified global civilization, a forgotten empire of builders whose aesthetic and engineering mastery surpassed our own. They asked questions that resonated with an age of skepticism. How could men of the 1800s construct such vast buildings without modern cranes, machinery, or electricity? Why do city halls and train stations resemble ancient temples, with columns reminiscent of Rome and Greece, yet appear in places those empires never reached? Why do photographs show construction sites where facades rise from foundations already covered by earth, as if the buildings had been unearthed rather than built? These mysteries became the pillars of the modern Tartarian narrative. But the truth behind this beauty lies in history, sown rhythm, a rhythm of rediscovery and imitation. The so-called impossible architecture of the 19th century was born from a deliberate revival, not a forgotten empire. It was the age of neoclassicism, when Europe sought to resurrect the ideals of ancient Rome and Greece, believing that beauty and symmetry reflected divine order and rational perfection. The architects of that era studied antiquity with obsessive devotion. They measured ruins, sketched facades, and translated stone into symbols of progress. Cities from St. Petersburg to Washington, D.C., were designed to convey empire, order, and enlightenment, not hidden antiquity, but conscious imitation. These buildings did not emerge from nowhere. They were financed by monarchs and governments eager to display power, built by thousands of craftsmen, masons, and laborers whose names history rarely records. Their grandeur was not the residue of a lost civilization, but the ambition of a modern one. The techniques that astonished modern eyes, prefabricated iron supports, mechanized stone cutting, and organized urban planning, were the products of the Industrial Revolution. Yet, when viewed through the lens of nostalgia and disbelief, these innovations seem impossible, and impossibility often breeds myth. Still, the believers of Tartaria point to a deeper uniformity, one that transcends style. How can buildings on different continents, raised by nations with no connection, share the same monumental grace? The answer lies in the global circulation of ideas. By the 19th century, architecture had become international. Books of design, printed in London and Paris, reached architects in New York, Calcutta, and Melbourne. The language of empire was shared. Marble, symmetry, the triumphal arch, the dome. What looks like evidence of a lost world is, in fact, proof of how interconnected our world had already become. And yet, behind these explanations, the allure remains. There is something undeniably ancient about these cities. A feeling that their stones remember more than they should, that the earth beneath them hides layers of forgotten time. This emotional truth is what sustains the myth. It speaks not of deceit, but of longing, a yearning for permanence in an age of impermanence, for mystery in an age of information. The architecture of Tartaria, real or imagined, becomes a mirror. In its marble and symmetry, we see our desire to believe that humanity once touched perfection, and that somehow, through amnesia or design, we have lost the blueprint. They call them marvels of modern ingenuity, the world's fairs of the 19th century, grand celebrations of progress, architecture, and human invention. Yet to those who question the accepted timeline, these exhibitions are something else entirely. The visible ruins of a forgotten world, hastily rebranded as temporary wonders of modernity. Between 1851 and 1915, cities like Paris, Chicago, St. Louis, and San Francisco hosted these monumental events. Palaces of electricity, halls of machinery, domes of glass, towers of iron, rising as if overnight, shimmering like visions from another age. The official story tells us they were built quickly, from plaster and wood, only to be torn down weeks later. But for many who have stared at their haunting photographs, the question lingers. Could such colossal, neoclassical masterpieces really have been temporary? Or were they remnants of something much older, much grander? A civilization whose memory was erased under the dust of a new world order. In the heart of Chicago, 1893, the World's Columbian Exposition dazzled 27 million visitors with a city of white marble facades, a landscape so immense it was called the White City. It had canals like Venice, colonnades like Rome, and domes that mirrored Constantinople. Electric lights illuminated the night like captured stars. Then, within months, the entire city vanished, officially dismantled. Some structures burned. Others, they said, were demolished to make way for progress. But to the believers of the Tartarian theory, this was not destruction. It was concealment. They see these fairs as a cover story, a way to display the remnants of Tartarian architecture to the world before wiping them from existence. The plaster facades, they claim, were merely a lie, an easy explanation for buildings far too advanced for the time. And then came the mud. Across continents, curious patterns of architecture began to emerge. Doors half buried below ground, windows sunk beneath modern streets, ancient basements now serving as first floors. From Russia to America, from old London to Melbourne, these anomalies became the foundation of a new narrative. The mud flood. The theory suggests that a global cataclysm, natural or man-made, once swept across the earth, burying cities in layers of soil and silt. In its wake, survivors repurposed the exposed rooftops and upper floors, re-inhabiting what were once higher stories of older, buried worlds. Proponents point to photographic evidence. Uneven streets, sunken windows, entire architectural levels hidden beneath modern cities. They claim these are not mere engineering quirks, but silent witnesses to a civilization that fell under the weight of mud and time. The story becomes even stranger when one looks at maps and records of the 18th and 19th centuries. Tartaria appears on maps stretching from the Ural Mountains to the Pacific Ocean, an immense region spanning Siberia, Mongolia, and Central Asia. Yet by the 20th century, the name vanishes completely. In its place, the empires we know today, Russia, China, the colonial territories of Britain and France. For the believers, this disappearance marks not a change in cartography, but the deliberate erasure of an empire's memory. They imagine the world's fairs as final exhibits of its technology and architecture, the last glimpses of a once unified global aesthetic before it was destroyed and rewritten as the age of progress. But perhaps the most haunting detail is not architectural. It is psychological. Why does the idea of a buried civilization capture so many minds? Maybe because, deep down, humanity senses how fragile memory really is. Empires rise and vanish. Cities crumble beneath floods, wars, and time. What we call history may only be the thin upper crust of a much deeper human story. Beneath every modern street, every layer of concrete, may lie echoes of worlds we no longer remember. And perhaps that is why the myth of Tartaria endures, not as an act of deception, but as a reflection of our longing to recover the lost chapters of civilization itself. There is a strange magnetism in the idea of something lost, a civilization wiped clean from the pages of history, its remnants hidden in plain sight. The Tartarian narrative taps into a deep and timeless current of the human psyche, the belief that we have forgotten something profound, that beneath the neat timelines of our textbooks lies a far older truth. From Plato's Atlantis to the vanished cities of the Indus and the Maya, humanity has always sought the ghost of a golden age. And in that longing, the myth of Tartaria finds fertile ground. In an age where satellites can map every inch of the Earth, and archives can digitize every fragment of the past, one might think mystery has been conquered. Yet, the more data we gather, the more cracks appear in our understanding of history. How did ancient builders lift stones weighing hundreds of tons? Why do civilizations separated by oceans share architectural patterns, pyramids, domes, sacred geometry? These are questions that feed the imagination, and for many, the theory of Tartaria offers an alluring explanation. A single, technologically advanced civilization that once spanned continents, connecting humanity before war and empire, divided it. But beyond evidence, there is emotion, a psychological hunger for meaning in the chaos of history. The industrial age, with its steam and smoke, replaced wonder with machinery. Progress came at a cost, a world disenchanted. And so, when the 21st century gazes back at photographs of the 1800s, at grand cities, electric trolleys, and forgotten architecture, it sees not just history, but yearning. The clean symmetry of neoclassical facades, the elegance of cast-iron domes, the towering cathedrals, they speak to an aesthetic harmony modern life seems to have lost. To some, these buildings could not have been born from soot-covered factories and political revolutions. They must have come from something higher, a civilization more refined, more spiritually aligned, perhaps erased to make room for a world of steel and wires. Yet, the real mystery may lie not in the earth, but in the mind. Historians and psychologists note how myths of lost civilizations often emerge during times of uncertainty. In eras of social upheaval, when people feel disconnected from their roots, the past becomes a refuge, a place to project unity and purpose. The 19th century had Atlantis. The 20th century dreamed of Lemuria and Mu. The 21st discovered Tartaria on glowing screens, shared through forums and videos, reborn through the digital echo chambers of the Internet. These stories spread because they fill a void that modern life leaves empty. The desire to belong to something vast, meaningful, and ancient. And still, behind the myth, fragments of truth linger. Entire cities have been lost beneath mud and ash. Civilizations have been erased by conquest and time. The Indus Valley was forgotten for millennia. Troy was once considered a legend until its ruins emerged from Turkish soil. The sands of the Sahara conceal Roman outposts, and in the jungles of Cambodia, the stones of Angkor still whisper of vanished empires. The line between myth and memory has always been fragile. Perhaps the real question is not whether Tartaria existed, but why we so deeply need to believe it did. Because beneath the theory lies something more universal, a quiet rebellion against the idea that our civilization is the pinnacle of progress. It is a yearning for balance, beauty, and mystery, for a time when architecture was poetry in stone and technology served harmony instead of haste. Whether or not Tartaria ever truly stood, it represents an ache that history cannot silence. The feeling that humanity has been here before, that we have built wonders, lost them, and are destined to rediscover them again. To search for Tartaria is to search not for a single empire, but for the echoes of countless civilizations that once shaped the vast lands of Eurasia. Beyond the myths, beyond the mud floods and vanished maps, lie real histories of empires, khanates, and nomadic cultures whose influence stretched across continents. The Mongol Empire, perhaps the most famous of these, once carved a path from the Pacific to the Danube, linking east and west through trade, communication, and conquest. Its legacy is evident not only in surviving fortresses and caravanserais, but in the diffusion of knowledge, art, and technology that crossed borders with the speed of horse and river. The steppes of Central Asia were alive with culture and movement, a network of people who understood the rhythms of the earth, the seasons, and the stars in ways that still inspire awe today. Timurid cities like Samarkand and Bukhara were living proof of human ambition and vision. Their geometries, their mosaics, their towering minarets and domes were often cited by modern enthusiasts as Tartarian in origin. Yet they were created by architects, artisans, and rulers whose names and deeds are preserved in history. These structures were not lost to myth. They were known, documented, and celebrated, though filtered through centuries of reinterpretation by travelers, map-makers, and chroniclers. And while the vast expanse of Siberia may seem empty today, it was not always a void. Indigenous peoples, from the Yakuts to the Buryats, lived in harmony with their environment, navigating rivers and forests, establishing settlements, and crafting tools and culture adapted to the extremes of climate and geography. In the West, European map-makers labeled these lands Tartary, but the name never captured the reality beneath it. The term oversimplified a complex mosaic of societies, lumping together Mongols, Turks, Siberians, and many others into one indistinct region. When empire expanded and cartography improved, the label vanished, replaced by precise borders and familiar names. Yet what is remarkable is how the imagination has persisted, coloring interpretations of architecture, photographs, and maps. What some see as a lost global civilization is in truth a reflection of humanity, its enduring fascination with scale, order, and beauty, a testament to our desire to connect the scattered brilliance of history into a coherent narrative, even when that narrative is incomplete. Tartaria, then, becomes less a story of erasure and more a lens through which to view our collective memory. It reminds us that the way we record history is not neutral. Every map, every textbook, every photograph carries the bias of its makers. The buildings attributed to a lost empire were the products of ambition, knowledge, and ingenuity of their own times. The streets, facades, and domes we admire today are monuments not to forgotten Tartars, but to human creativity surviving in every era. Even the mud floods, the half-buried windows, the stories of sudden destruction, all speak less to conspiracies and more to the layers of human labor, reconstruction, and adaptation that accumulate in every city across centuries. And yet, there is beauty in the myth. It allows us to see history as alive, as something that can surprise, confuse, and captivate. Tartaria teaches us that the past is not fixed. It is interpreted, reinterpreted, and rediscovered by each generation. By examining the legend, we come to understand the reality behind it. The steppe empires, the great khanates, the architectural marvels, and the nomadic cultures that formed the backbone of Eurasia's history. These are the true legacies beneath the myth, civilizations whose influence persists in the stones, the streets, and the imagination of the modern world. As we trace the echoes of these lost and living cultures, a larger reflection emerges. Perhaps Tartaria exists not in the erasure of maps or the sediment of mud floods, but in the human mind itself, in our yearning to understand, to connect, and to believe that civilization is not linear, but layered, overlapping, and often misunderstood. The myth invites us to look closer, to see the hidden brilliance in our world, and to remember that every stone, every dome, every ancient street has a story to tell. It is a story not of what was erased, but of what endured, waiting for those willing to uncover it. In the end, Tartaria is less about mystery than it is about revelation. It is about the awe inspired by human achievement, the fragile persistence of memory, and the timeless allure of forgotten worlds. History is not erased. It is waiting to be seen, interpreted, and celebrated. And in seeking the lost empire, we find ourselves looking at the continuity of human ingenuity, the grandeur of culture, and the ever-unfolding map of our shared past. And so the story of Tartaria ends not with a definitive answer, but with reflection. A quiet invitation to look closer, to question what we are told, and to see the traces of human endeavor hidden beneath layers of time. The maps, the buildings, the legends, they remind us that history is never fixed. It is a living mosaic composed of memory, imagination, and discovery. In every sunken window, every colossal dome, every photograph from a vanished city, there is a whisper of the past calling to us, urging us to remember that humanity's story is far larger, far more intricate than we often allow ourselves to imagine. The myth of Tartaria persists because it touches something universal: our fascination with lost knowledge, our longing for beauty, and our yearning to connect with civilizations that came before us. Whether the empire truly existed or not, it stands as a symbol, a mirror reflecting our desire to see greatness, ingenuity, and wonder in the world around us. It teaches us that even in the absence of certainty, the act of seeking, of exploring, and of questioning reveals truths as profound as any documented fact. Perhaps the greatest legacy of Tartaria is not the buildings, the maps, or the imagined empire itself, but the reminder that human history is layered, resilient, and endlessly surprising. Every stone, every street, every forgotten name is a testament to our capacity to create, to endure, and to inspire. The past is never truly lost. It is hidden in plain sight, waiting for those willing to trace its outlines, to read between the lines of maps and myths, and to marvel at the civilizations that shape the world we inhabit today. And as we close this chapter, we are left with a sense of awe, not at the empire that may have been, but at the enduring ingenuity of humanity itself. Every map tells a story, every structure carries a memory, and every legend invites us to explore deeper. In the shadows of Tartaria, we find the light of understanding, the thrill of curiosity, and the timeless reminder that history is not simply written. It is discovered layer by those who dare to look beyond the surface.